Hello and welcome to Sensei podcast. This is Manos Brilakis discussing with leaders in the field of CTO and complex PCI. Sensei means teacher or master in Japanese. The goal of the Sensei podcast is to help you learn and improve in CTO and complex PCI so that you can become the best that you can be and offer your patients the best possible results. Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Sensei Podcast. This is Manos Brilakis. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Scott Harding from Auckland, Australia, who is the director of the Cath Lab at Wellington Hospital and professor of medicine at Victoria University, one of the world leading experts in CTO PCI from the very early days of the procedure. Scott, welcome again and thanks for being part of the Sensei Podcast.
Thanks, Manos. It's Wellington, New Zealand, but Australia's pretty close.
Actually, it's fascinating. I think it's like noon here and it's like 7 a.m. from your place the next day. So there's obviously a huge difference in time, but it's fascinating we can do this even with, this huge time difference.
Yeah, it's nice and sunny. It's a beautiful morning here.
So, Scott, I know you've discussed about this before, about your trip in CTO PCI and that you started from the early days, the late 90s, and you learned some of the best in the field. But can you summarize in a few words how this happened for you and what were the people who were key in your helping learn CTO PCI?
Yeah, I was very lucky to be involved in the field, as you say, in the late 90s, and the grey hairs are starting to show now. I was lucky enough to meet Tamai and Kato when they were still developing some of the seminal changes in CTO PCI, the new wires, the retrograde approach, etc., etc. And really, it was just amazing to see what they could do. And it was a complete revolution from what we had been doing. We were basically just using very stiff wires and poking them straight ahead. So that was really important. But I was very lucky in that, to get good at this, I really wanted to work with as many people as possible, both by going to their hospital and for them to come to us. And so I've worked as a variety of operations, obviously some of the leading Japanese operators, as I say, Tamai, Kato, Tushi Kani, Samasuchi, Dr. Ochai, to name a few, but also Bill Lombardi, Dimitri, Simon and Colm have been really important in my development as a CTO operator, and I continue to try and interact with those people because there's always something to learn and always a better way of doing things.
And how able to combine? Clearly, there are different schools, right? You have the Japanese school, which is very methodical, very structured, and then they have the North American, European school, which may be a little more for tour de force, trying to get things done a little faster. How do you reconcile those, and how has your practice evolved?
Yeah, I think my belief is the truth is always in the middle, usually. I think that the Japanese have a very methodical approach, as you say. Time's not the metric they're interested in. Success without complication is. On the other hand, sometimes trying to stay in the artery and at all costs can lead to failure and also excessive time, and that ADR or dissection re-entry techniques, have been a huge part of very complex PCI and very necessary. So I think if we can take the best of both those worlds, then we can improve outcomes for patients.
Wonderful. And then you said you keep on learning. What are the tools you use right now to help you learn more? Is it meetings, talking to people, reading?
Yeah. Look, I think we're very lucky in that, we're sort of overwhelmed with information at the moment in the virtual world, as well as the print world. I think for people coming through, obviously you want to start out by doing your background reading and, the global algorithm, and is a really good place to start. Other seminal papers around CTO PCI, your manual, which is a fantastic resource. Going to meetings, seeing live cases, I think is a really good way of starting to learn about CTO PCI. I think, it does have its limitations, but it really gives you an overview of some of the techniques and how things get done. Obviously, there's no substitute for doing cases, and having someone, teach you how to do cases. And even once you've become established, getting people to come and proctor you on more, difficult cases is extremely important.
And how has the environment been in your hospital, in Wellington Hospital? Have they been receptive of this, supportive, okay with the complications? Did that help with the program development?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge. When I got back to Wellington, there was no CTO program and really no complex PCI program. And, it took a while for people to understand this because, there was no atherectomy, there was no these sort of procedures. So I think what you had to do is, an important part of this is getting stuff done, but getting stuff done safely, because when you're establishing a program, you have to have success without complications for people to sort of trust the program. And so it was a big part of what we did to start off was to make sure that we were very safe about what we did, because complications early on can destroy a program.
No, absolutely. And then in terms of the technique development and equipment, are you a believer of the big equipment inventory, or are you more minimalistic and choosing? What is your current practice, and how did you learn about that?
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself minimalistic. I'm lucky enough to be the boss in the cath lab, so I can, to a certain degree, choose what we get to use. So, and we do have a wide inventory, and I guess part of that reason is we work with a number of different companies, and often companies provide inventory so we can try it and see how it works and things like that. So that's part of it. But I do have a core inventory, which does change, because I always think there's new developments, there's new wires, there's new microcatheters, there's new techniques which are useful. So I'm not a minimalist. We do have a wide range of wires, but I do have a core range that I do use.
Now, in terms of the cases, are there some good or bad cases that you've done over the years that really stuck to your mind, that you think of them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cases. The bad ones, I think, always stick a bit more than the good ones. But I think the bad one that does stick to my mind was a post-bypass right coronary artery, was heavily calcified, long lesion, and ambiguous proximal cap. We tried to go retrograde, couldn't get the knuckle to advance very far. We did an IVUS guided puncture, antegrade, and then tried to advance a wire, and couldn't. Took a stiff wire, advanced a bit of way, and then to knuckle. And then the knuckle basically just went outside the artery. And then we got tamponade and really couldn't even deliver a balloon to the perforation site. And fortunately, the patient went to surgery and was okay. But I think part of the learning of that case was I didn't really understand the course of the vessel. I didn't really understand the anatomy. And I think in that situation, really using stiff wires, even to cross short distances when you don't understand the anatomy is a dangerous thing to do. So that's sort of set into mind. In terms of successes, I mean, there's been some good cases. I mean, just because it's fresh, we did a live case on Saturday. It was a really nice case. So it's just an example of how things are becoming more complex. This is a 78-year-old lady. She's still independent, still walking around, still working as an accountant 3 days a week. But she's got a lot of comorbidity, peripheral vascular disease, an ejection fraction of 32%, an EGFR of between 30 and 35. So not great, and essentially had an occluded right coronary artery, which was very large, osteocclusion, heavily calcified, with sort of no stump. And so our plan for that was to go retrograde, and with with minimal contrast. So we managed to do that, and then do a puncture into the aorta under IVUS guidance. So we had an IVUS in the aorta to confirm that the wire was exiting in the right place. And fortunately, we managed to get images of that, which was really nice. And then externalized the wire and modified it with shockwave and got a really nice result. At that point, we'd only used 2 mils of contrast, and then took a final picture with 5 mils to demonstrate there was no perforations or issues or things like that. But I think that's probably a summation of my learnings. Using imaging to guide things, really using techniques to minimize contrast. There was a good epicardial, but we used a septal and navigated through a more difficult septal for safety reasons. Again, it's just an example of the techniques we've got now to do these sort of complex cases.
Thanks, Scott. And as you said before, preparation is a key part of this. And I think you told us a story about how you learned this with Dr. Tsuchikani, and how do you currently prepare your cases?
Yeah, I think preparation for the cases is really, really important. I have to say, earlier in my career, I used to get a bit intimidated by, looking at some of the CTOs. I'd look at this, very complex CTO and go, well, how am I ever going to get this done, And I think there are 2 really important things. The first thing is to understand the angiogram. And the story I often tell about Tsuchikani is the first time he came to our lab, I'd seen the pictures in advance. We'll sit down to have a look at the angiogram before the case. I looked at it for about 5 minutes and he was still looking at it. And then we looked at it for 10 minutes and he was still looking at it. And I walked away and came back 10 minutes later and he was still looking at it. And I walked away. They came back about after half an hour and he just finished looking at it then. And, he spent a lot of time really trying to understand the collaterals, what was the dominant collateral, what the filling patterns were, what the anatomy was, making a map of the course of the vessel. And I think that really, really does help. And often looking at the angiogram on 2 or 3 occasions can help. I think the other thing I learned from Dr. Samitsuchi when he came to the lab was really a good way of thinking about CTO PCI. He likened it to conquering a mountain, if you would like. That you need to have good plan, strategy, good equipment, if you're going to, conquer that mountain. But also that if you look at the mountain as a whole, it's quite intimidating. But what you're trying to do is do one stage at a time to move your way up the mountain. CTO PCI is like that. I think one of the important things is to have a clear plan, and obviously the global algorithm helps with that. But really to look at it one stage at a time, focus on moving through that stage and then on to the next stage. And that way, amazingly, if you just work through the stages in a logical manner, you usually get success.
So, Scott, you've been the architect of the Asia-Pacific algorithm, a key person for the global algorithm. Do you actually apply it for every case, or now you've kind of moved beyond this because of your experience and extensive expertise in this area?
I still use it as a framework, and certainly use it when I'm teaching fellows and other people who are visiting. I think it's, obviously I'm a believer in it. But there's always cases once you become very experienced where you sort of go slightly off piece, but largely I still stick to it as a framework. And I think, for example, guidance about when you use retrograde, guidance about, how to overcome a proximal cap, when to knuckle, those sort of things are the rules, and are generally what I stick to.
Wonderful. So when people come to you, you taught many people all over the world, but when someone comes to you and says, I want to learn from you, is there something that excites you and makes you want more to teach this person? How do you choose who to teach or not?
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting world at the moment. As you know, that structural intervention has become huge. And I guess my view is you can't be expert at everything. And that's why I don't do structural. Look, it's fascinating, and I'm sure, there's a lot of, superb developments coming. But I don't believe that you can be an expert in structural and an expert in complex PCI. I think some people could be good at both, but I don't think you can be exceptional. So what I really like is when people come to me and say, look, I'm really interested in coronary PCI. I really want to learn how to do this well. Um, and because for me, CTO PCI is not only about CTO PCI, it's about complex PCI, because the skills that you learn from CTO PCI make you so much better at complex PCI. Just very simple things, trapping in the guide, obviously. But, use of the anchor balloon technique is a very powerful technique. I've used it in 2 complex cases this week because use of a guideline just wasn't providing extra support. And, so simple things that we learn during CTO PCI are very applicable to complex PCI and make you a much better operator.
Absolutely, and you're right. I mean, for me, the day after the CTO day is always a relaxed day in the lab because everything feels so easy, as you said, after you've done the complex cases. But you've done a lot of live cases, you mentioned, and taught people through those. How valuable do you think you are? Are live cases really needed? Are they a good tool, or maybe not necessarily?
Look, I think they are a good tool. Certainly, when I was younger, I really enjoyed watching some of the masters doing a live case. And there are 2 things I got out of it. One is seeing them work through the techniques when I was trying to learn retrograde, because there's a lot of steps to that. And secondly, actually, even experts struggle. And even experts fail sometimes, and so sometimes that makes you feel a bit better when you're not successful.
No, absolutely. And then, in terms of your current state of the field, what are the things that excite you the most?
Yeah, look, there's always new and better ways of doing things, and usually I set myself, 1 or 2 goals each year. How can I improve my practice? And I think I might have mentioned to you this year, what I want to do is become more expert in CTCA. This is obviously a big mover in the field of coronaries. A lot of people are having CTCAs, a lot of people coming to the lab with CTCAs already done. I mean, a report gives you a little bit of information, but it really doesn't give you that much information. As you know, I spent a bit of time in Japan, and if you watch them going through a CTCA, the amount of knowledge they get out of it, guide choice, location of calcium, the course of the vessel, et cetera, is amazing. And so my plan is, I've got a bit of sabbatical time, is to go and actually learn CTCA, not to report CTCA, but how to better interpret it, manipulate the images, so I can use that to guide my complex PCI better.
And then what do you think has been the foundation for your success, being such a great operator, having national, international recognition? What made it possible?
Obviously, a department that was very supportive, because that's, if people in the department aren't supportive of the program, then it's very, very difficult. But I think that becomes with success without complications. It's a lot easier to support a program. Second thing is that, I've been lucky enough to learn from a large number of expert operators, not only the Japanese operation, but Bill Lombardi was very good to me, and taught me a lot. He's come to our lab, I've been to his lab. Bill and Coleman, Simon, Dimitri have also been very, influential, great friends. So I think, trying to take every opportunity to increase your case volume, to learn from different expert operators, either by them coming to your lab or you going out and seeking time in their lab is a really great way to improve your skills.
Perfect. And then how do you keep in shape? Being in the lab so many hours doing these complex cases. What are the secrets? I saw you in the gym in one of the meetings. So are you exercising regularly or?
Yeah, I mean, exercise and sport has always been a really important part of my life. So I played rugby till I was 30 and then did triathlon after that, and not doing that anymore. I don't have enough time, but I still run regularly. As you know, it's a pretty efficient form of exercise that you can do anywhere. And we've got 5 kids, so I've been very actively involved in their sport as well. So, and I really find that really helpful. We're all busy. We spend far too much time in the hospital and indoors. And so actually to get home and to get outside and do physical activity, I find, great.
Yeah, especially in New Zealand, which is a beautiful country next to the ocean too. How about, what is your favorite book and your favorite movie?
Yeah, favorite movie. I really like movies like Castaway or The Martian. Those sort of movies where people sort of face adversity and quite, innovative ways of solving problems, etc. So that'll be some of my favorite movies.
Perfect. How about the book?
That's a good one. Probably recently, in the last couple of years, I read a book, probably along your lines of Manus, called Atomic Thinking, which basically talks about how to organize your thoughts and your practice so you create good habits to get stuff done more efficiently.
Relevant for life and for CTO-PCI, right? So, wonderful. And then, what are you most proud of the things that you've achieved so far, both in medicine and outside medicine?
Yeah. Well, outside medicine, I'm most proud of my 5 children, who are fantastic. We've got one left at home, but they're all, 4 of them are growing up and doing great, and got a really good relationship with them. So, obviously extremely proud of that. Within work, I think, we've created a really good, complex PCI program at Wellington Hospital that's helped a huge number of people. And also, obviously trained quite a large number of fellows who've all gone on and done well. So, we're looking to continue to improve and evolve that program. And, we've got more good trainees coming, and that'll be fantastic.
Wonderful. Now, do you have any plans to retire, or are you going to be doing this forever?
I don't think I want to be doing this forever. So my wife and I talk about this often, and I think, I'll definitely be retiring. I won't be doing this when I'm 70. That's for sure. And, I think, we like to think we're not getting older, and we like to think we're still at the top of the game, but I think as you age, particularly past a certain point, that you're probably not as good as you used to be, and probably leaving before you get to that point is the thing to do, and pass on the torch. So, one of the key things I want to do is try and develop people in Wellington who can do what I can do, so that when I retire, the program continues and is better.
Perfect. That's always a sign of mastery, to know where to quit, which is not an easy one, as you said, but definitely something that, especially for something high intensity as this, can be difficult. So, in terms of giving an overview for people who want to do this all around the world, like what are the top 2 or 3 pieces of advice you would give them so they can start their program and become good and solid and complex CTO operators?
So first piece of advice is, do your background reading. I think the global CTO algorithm is a good starting point. There's many references in that. The CTO manual is a great resource. And of course, there's some papers on algorithms within algorithms that are great resources. 2, obviously, a lot of people have done a CTO training program or a fellowship, or a CHIP fellowship now. But that's just the beginning of your learning, and the key is to try and get cases. And if you're not getting enough cases where you are, you need to look at other ways you might be able to get cases at other hospitals or to increase your volume. Get proctors to come and proctor you. I still have people come to my lab, and I still learn lots. There's not an operator I've worked with that I haven't learned something from. So I think that's a real key thing. And go out and see if you can visit people in their labs, or scrub in at different labs, because you will learn something. So that would be my top tips.
And then I know it's now all about structural, as you said, but do you think there is still room and need for good CTO and complex operators?
Oh, more than ever. I think, this is the evolution of CTO PCI. In the beginning it was, sort of wire balloon, then wire balloon stent. And, that was, relatively straightforward because we're dealing with relatively straightforward lesions. But now what we're dealing with is hugely complex lesions, but also hugely complex patients, as I described earlier. And to master techniques for minimal contrast, for overcoming calcified lesions, really is becoming a daily occurrence. And not to mention physiology, which I think is extremely important. And the more I learn about physiology, the less I know, I think.
Well, Scott, I would like to thank you once again. This was amazing insights into the field of CTO and complex PCI. You've obviously been one of the fathers in the field. Like, you've done a lot of things. So thanks for taking the time to provide your wisdom into these areas. Really enjoyed learning from you, and hope to see you at one of the upcoming meetings soon.
It was a pleasure, Manos.
Thank you for listening to the Sensei podcast.